if you're really focused with it, it can be a great way to explore stuff.
Hi, I'm Vlad Bresnix. Welcome back to the BresnixCast, episode number 32. And I know we've done a lot of metal on the show lately, an awful lot of it. So we're going to switch things up a bit, and we're going to be talking to experimental producer Lee Noble today. And what I really like about Lee's music is the fact that he takes an experimental approach not only to making the music itself, but also to like constructing live shows and stuff like that. And he's made some great music, and I think you'll really enjoy the conversation actually. And speaking of it, let's listen to some Lee just before we get started. So this is the title track from his most recent album. This is Ashenden. So I am here with the excellent Lee Noble. Lee, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And absolutely, I've been a fan of your stuff for a while now. So we'll start the way we usually start with newer guests. So why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and sort of how you got into making music?
All right. Let's see. I lived in Los Angeles for about 10 years, and I kind of moved there after college. I studied film in college, and I played in some bands before that, but when I moved out there, I started playing music by myself. And so I guess I've always just been interested in, sound stuff and design. And I always was interested in synthesizers and trying to get into, trying to learn about the kind of technical stuff with that stuff. But so I don't know. I just started experimenting and making weird recordings and just sort of searching around for sounds that I was interested in and wanted to explore. And I think as that's gone further along, I've just tried to refine what I like a bit more, but maybe not also.
Yeah, no, it's kind of interesting as well. Like, your stuff it's trying to think of what the right word is. I'm going to go with abstract, but I want to save that for a bit later. But anyway, no, it's kind of interesting as well. Like, and I was reading a few things about you as well, and I read that like it was only recently that you started kind of using like sort of computers and stuff like that. Is that right?
Yes, very recently.
So what kind of stuff were you using to make the songs beforehand?
I was using a self-contained 8-track recorder that has like an hour of hard disk space on it. It's like a Fostex machine from the 90s. And so it's just self-contained, and so I would record on that. And then I got that. My dad is a guitar player in Nashville, so he's like a country guy. So I was around a lot of recording studios when I was a kid. And so this Fostex thing that I had for a long time was just like a cast off of one of my dad's friends' recording studios. And so I used that forever, but it broke eventually, and then I kind of got a replacement, same kind of deal though, as like a Zoom self-contained thing that records on SD card. And then so I don't know, I just never learned I knew a lot of editing software going to school, but I just never really got super into like the DAWs. I never learned those, and so I just totally avoided it. And since I was making really unedited music, that was, it didn't really matter, because I was just like, well, it's just kind of a presentation of what I was working on or what I had done. So I didn't really do a lot of editing Yeah,
I actually in that same interview that I was reading with you, it said that like that you'd started using like sort of video editing software to make sound when you actually made a move towards using computers.
Yeah, that's right, because I knew that software better, and I finally had some, with that tape that I did last year, I finally had some like really intense editing that I needed to do. And so that's just what I ended up using. But it was all just, very basic, like fades and cuts and stuff. Just, coming from that video editing kind of language. So that's what I ended up doing.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's funny. We've got kind of some parallels that you might not be aware of. My dad also is, for years, played in like folk and country bands. He'd be like a bass player, most likely. Oh, yeah. Well, he is a bass player. And me and, like, it's funny, when I was younger, there was like, maybe stuff of his that was like older and he wasn't using anymore, 4-tracks and microphones and things like that. He'd obviously showed us how to play, like, me and my brothers how to play guitars and things like that when we were younger, but there was all this kind of other stuff that he'd had, and maybe it was old and he wasn't using it. And that's how I got interested interested in a lot of kind of electronic music like myself, just from like, having these old kind of like 4 tracks and things like that, arsing about with them, just kind of making some kind of sound. And then, when I got kind of more into electronic music, I think in a way, I was never like, I'm not exactly like you, like I used to mess about with that stuff when I was younger, but fairly, I would say kind of like early 20s, I kind of got into the more kind of computer-based stuff. Like, I still have like, obviously a lot of normal instruments. I play like a range of instruments, but like I got more into the sort of your kind of Ableton Live sort of thing, that sort of. And it has its advantages, and I think it has its downsides and stuff like that. I think it's all a question of how you use the software. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I'm sure it has tremendous advantages. I just it's just like the interface never really clicked with me for some reason. And I mean, I'm trying to learn it now. I'm trying to get better now.
There's a million videos on YouTube about it. I've been through most of it.
Or it's easy now. I mean, I totally missed the boat on it, but for whatever reason, I guess I just was just doing all this kind of tactile stuff and using all this kind of like junk old equipment that I've gathered when it was cheap and stuff. So
but don't you think that adds a bit of character to your music as well? The fact that like you were using all this kind of old stuff and stuff like that, and you can generate all sorts of things like online and stuff like that, but I think there is something, I don't know what it is, there's just something like when a lot of time when you hear like sort of sound that's generated in other ways, it's different and it has its own thing and its own character, if you know what I mean.
Well, I think if you know the software and you know exactly the type of sound that you're looking for, you might be able to dial it in really quickly. But I guess I just found that, by, using a couple old tape recorders and, a shitty delay pedal that I had laying around, I could kind of make all these layers with that stuff, and it would just have this sort of automatic atmosphere to it. And I just found that there was a lot to explore there, I guess, and I just thought it was very satisfying to just kind of put these couple plugs together and make this kind of cloud of atmosphere. So,
and that's the thing. See, I've mentioned this kind of a bit before, like on the show and stuff like that. We're talking about like using stuff like talking about like using different hardware and things like that. And I mean, the thing is, you mentioned pedals. Actually, I'll go off on a pedal tangent for a minute. It's like once you start. Pedals are like, it's at first like, you can do so much with guitar pedals. You can use them to generate all kinds of feedback loops and noise and stuff. But then it very, very quickly, I found this in my case, gets to the point where all of a sudden, you started like with one or two, and then this was with me. Then all of a sudden there's like 15 pedals. And then you're just like, is this too much? At some point you're like, where do I actually draw the line between, like ripping the piss out of this, and generating some genuinely kind of interesting and unique sound?
Yeah. You can always go overboard with the gear. And, I never had that many pedals. I always just had like 2 delay pedals. And, but I did get really into like different synthesizers and stuff. So, as soon as I had a real job and I had a little bit of money, I would definitely buy a synthesizer, and those kind of stacked up at a certain point. But I've slimmed back down again now. I also have almost no gear now. I just from changing jobs and being unemployed for a while, so I've managed to keep a lid on things, I guess. I'm not succeeding very well.
I know what you mean as well. Like, I mean, I've never really like, I've got a few synthesizers, but I've never really racked up a whole lot of them. But there was a period when I was like, I found out, like, you know, these people that build their own modular synths and all that, and, you know, they have the big, huge things and all these different little bits they put in and stuff like that. And I was kind of thinking about like getting into it, and then I was like, kind of stopping myself because I was like, this will take over my life and I won't get anything productive done. Like, I will just spend forever building this massive synthesizer and I probably won't even get anything done with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I did get into the Eurorack stuff a little bit. I still have a few modules right now, and I've kind of gotten into it and out of it twice. And the first time, it was a few years ago, and it was way harder to buy that stuff then. Now it's super, super easy to buy anything, and it's all secondhand because so many more people are doing it. So, but, yeah, dude, it's like, well, I never managed to even fill a case with it because I was just, I could never buy that much of it. So, but I got a couple good, pieces out of it that I was, you know, if you're really focused with it, it can be a great way to explore stuff, but it can be so consuming in a way. And the online like community or scene of that stuff is a lot of obsessive people. So
yeah.
It's definitely a tricky zone.
Oh yeah, definitely, and it's interesting. We're kind of talking about like using like older kind of like gear and stuff like that, and it is a kind of thing. And just now, I hear people in some genres. I've mentioned this before as well. Like some people kind of talk about how, like, you know, with being able to record at home with such ease now, like on just laptops and things like that. And some genres, people are like, you know, the quality of music's gone downhill and, you know, like it's destroying the genre. I've heard people say things like that, but I've always thought that that's very genre dependent. You know, there are other genres that can benefit from, like, you know, there's genres that you can think of that have often used like stuff that's maybe been what we might consider like old or subpar equipment wise. You know, I'm thinking just off the top of my head, black metal, industrial things, like just things like that, you know. And I actually think that a lot of the time, especially like with your music as well, like you get kind of, I don't want to say a more real sound, but it's almost like a more kind of like fragile and sort of like, I always prefer music that's underproduced to overproduced. And I think if you're in the right genre for doing that kind of thing, you know, it can actually, the home recording thing's really good for that.
Well, I think, yeah, I totally agree with that. And I just think, like, you know, music, I see it just as a parallel for like visual artwork too. You know, like not every painting has to be this like perfectly rendered photorealistic image. You know, like there's room in this art form for different types of, you know, expression. And I don't think music has to necessarily, I mean, it's great when people are super expert producers and they're like really technically genius. And I mean, I just think there's room for, less rendered, less careful work. And I've, you know, when I just work better with limitations too. Like if I have every option in front of me in the world, like I'm just kind of frozen, and I'm just really more or better at, you know, exploring. And that's what I like to do, is just kind of explore and find stuff, and rather than like really carefully, perfectly translate my ideas. You know, I kind of start with no ideas and go somewhere. And so I just think there's room for a little bit more messy work, I guess.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And then almost, it's like the way you're saying that, it's almost like then the music becomes like a process, you know, like it's a process of you discovering sounds and like trying out other things, you know. And we use the word experimental a lot, but that's really what experimental is. Yeah,
I think so. And I just, you know, there's other people, there's other artists who do better stuff, better quality stuff. And I just think there's room, you know, there's room for, you can listen to somebody else for a minute if you need clarity, and if you want confusion, you can put on one of my records.
Well, there's so much overproduced stuff, it's not hard to find it if you're looking for it.
Yeah.
But let's talk about like your most recent album. So it's Ashenden. So why don't you tell us like a bit about that?
That came together because I wanted to go play in Japan, and so I was working with some friends of friends and was emailing Josh from that label, and he was going to help me put some shows together, and then he was like, well, why don't you do a tour tape also? And so I probably had about half of those recordings just laying around, different kind of experiments that I was working on and trying to work out. And then, after we got the tour all lined up, I kind of finished the tape so that it would be ready in time. And they turned it around very quickly because they have some very fast tape dubbers over there in Asia, I guess. But, yeah, so it's kind of a Japan special edition little collection.
Interesting. Actually, Japan's somewhere I've never been, but I would like to visit. And as well, the noise and experimental music that's come out of Japan over the years has been like incredible. So much of it. I mean, it's one of those things. But see, as well, one of the things I wanted to touch on, like, see, I'm a big fan of like the artwork that you've had, like, on your albums and stuff as well, because I think it fits so well because it's always quite abstract in some way, but your music is quite abstract like that as well. So I think it often fits together.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, usually I do the artwork. I haven't done it for the past two ones, but yeah, I mean, I kind of always thought some of it's kind of incongruous with the music, because I used a lot of bright colors and stuff on some of the LP jackets, and I mean, I really enjoy kind of doing packaging design and trying to work all that stuff out. I don't know a huge amount about it, but I like to work on it.
Yeah, like I said, I think it's very coherent with the music, and I often will mention the artwork in interviews because I'm as interested in the artwork as well. Because for me, like an album is the entire package. Kind of why I like vinyl so much, because you just can't get that artwork in any other format.
It's very important part of the physical release. Yeah, that's kind of the sustaining thing. Otherwise, just download it if it doesn't have good artwork, I guess.
And that's the thing as well, because I believe you were involved with No King's record, cadre?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's kind of like tapes and stuff, like cassette. And we've talked about cassettes on, you've mentioned a bit of it already. We've talked about that in the show because I was kind of surprised when like I'd first kind of heard about like that cassette culture was kind of back. There was a resurgence in, cassette labels and people buying cassettes, because I found it a bit confusing at first because I understood the resurgence of vinyl because of the quality and all the rest of it. But I mean, like, I remember like obviously using cassettes a lot when I was younger and doing a lot of messing about with them, but largely from listening to like music on cassette, what I kind of remember is it just being a pain in the arse, like I want to get to the other song and I need to go through all this kind of stuff. So like, I don't know if it's more nostalgia or just people wanting something physical, but what do you think about this resurgence that I've seen anyway, particularly of like cassette labels and cassettes becoming a thing again?
Well, I've always been a big fan of tapes. I've listened to them my whole life. And I always had a tape player in my car, and I didn't think of it as a nostalgic thing. When we started doing the label, it was a very practical decision because they were so easy to produce. They're just really cheap when we first started. And that was kind of at a time when a lot of people were like burning CDs, and those became very disposable. So making a CD was just like, it was kind of at the end of that and at the beginning of online stuff. and making a tape was so cheap, and that was sort of the reason to continue doing something physical, because there was an opportunity for interesting packaging there, and then that's right. I also thought it's a really good format for abstract music, because in that case, you're not trying to get to the next song, you're not trying to get to your favorite part necessarily. It just kind of unfolds, and it's like a one button play. You don't even have to flip the record if you have an automatic tape player. So
yeah, no, I found this interesting, like I've seen like a bunch of these labels that have popped up, even like fairly recently, and they're doing the sort of the cassette thing and stuff like that, which, I found it very interesting. Like I said, I mean, it's so funny because a lot of people talked about how, I remember years ago, when like the internet was really getting going and stuff like that, and people were thinking like, some people were saying like, by this time, nobody will be reading physical books, it'll all be on Kindles, and nobody will be buying physical music because it will all be purely digital. And while there is obviously an awful lot of that, there does seem to be, like, with the resurgence like of cassettes or vinyl, like I said, there seems to be a thing where people just like having something physical. I particularly like vinyl, and I'm a big reader as well, and I've got a Kindle for stuff that's hard to get or whatever, because it's easy to find and it's cheap. But largely, I mean, like, if you could see where I'm just now, I'm surrounded by books. I prefer the physical book. I like the look of a physical book. I like holding it in my hand. I like, the cover, the artwork, the packaging, and all that kind of thing you were mentioning. And I think you're just never going to drive out the physical product, because I think as humans, we're so ingrained, millions of years of evolution of like, having physical things. And I can't remember who said it, but it was mentioned on the show, but like, buying a download, while I will sometimes do it for certain purposes, it is kind of like buying thin air.
Yeah, it's not hugely satisfying to do that. But I just think, one thing is, if you just, you're not going to move everything digitally on, it just gets tedious, you need variety. So I think there's room for all that stuff.
I think so too. I mean, absolutely. I mean, and that's kind of something that's been like, that I've thought is, pretty heartening to me. It's like, I see a lot of young people, younger than me, getting into these kind of physical formats, buying vinyl, buying cassettes and stuff like that. And even though I don't really buy cassettes, to be honest, like, I still understand where they're coming from. I think it's a really good thing that younger people are getting into it, like, because, I mean, it is interesting the way you put it there, like how with the tape, it's not like you can't just skip about and you listen to 5 seconds and jump on to the next thing. It's like, you're in that experience. It's like, or you could, I mean, we all know what it's like trying to fucking fast forward tapes and shit. But like, I know what you mean. That's an interesting kind of take on it. I never really thought about it like that way, where it's like you're kind of like, it's not forced to, but like, it's more likely that you're going to take it as one thing, like albums really should be,
Yeah, I think it's easier to unfold that way, I guess. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would just do more vinyl, except it's so expensive, it's really just, it's a great happy medium between affordability and it probably feels a little bit more meaningful to, produce something.
And it's funny as well when you think about it, like, because we're talking about cassette and vinyl, but there was the formats that kind of I remember being about, but they never really won out. I mean, I'm too young to remember 8-tracks. Like, I know what they are, but I remember when the minidisc was quite a popular thing, and some people have talked about, like, kind of bringing that back sort of thing, but like, it was never, I don't know, it never gained that much popularity. I remember like having friends with mini disc players and stuff like that. I never actually owned one, but I had friends who had them and stuff. And even when you think about, people always talk about the old thing about like, you'd VHS and Betamax, and Betamax was much better quality, but just the way the market worked, VHS won out,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think people at large are so short-sighted when it comes to these sort of technological changes and developments, and I just think people need to evaluate each one on its merits, and before they completely, decimate the infrastructure for making each one. I mean, it's kind of like the vinyl comeback, back in the day when every record label jumped ship on vinyl and shut down all the factories and fired every expert in that field, and now it's cool again and has been proven again, and there's a huge backlog of stuff waiting to be produced, and there's only a couple factories in the States, and so I think people just need to be slower with those kind of decisions and be rational about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's interesting because I suppose there's always these competing formats and stuff like that, and you never kind of know what's going to take off. But if I could switch gears for a second, I've seen some videos of some of your live performances, and your live performances are always very interesting. They seem quite varied. So tell us a bit about your approach when you're building a live set.
Well, I have treated playing live as sort of its own experiment. I usually don't play recordings from my records exactly. Well, never exactly, but I usually just don't even play. I usually make up a set for each show. And I often use different equipment at each show, and it's because, I'm just interested in it being an experiment. It's truly, it's just a genuine experiment for me, just making music in general, and I don't need to play hits or whatever for anybody, and I don't need to beat anybody over the head with my, best tracks or whatever. So yeah, I'm just kind of searching for, stuff that interests me. And, when I went to Japan, I did very carefully put together a set that was specific for that. And I played it almost exactly at every show, which is a big change for me, but there's not a lot of good documentation of my shows either. So if you watch something on YouTube, I'm sure it was garbage, but
I don't think so. I know it would probably be better if I was there. But that is one of those things, isn't it? Because, growing up going to rock shows and even folk shows and stuff like that, where people would play the songs as they are. And sometimes you get some variation and some jamming, and it was all good. But then when I was kind of younger, I think the first gig I kind of went to was I don't know if you know the British ambient, the ambient band The Orb. They're the ambient house guys. Yeah, I went to see them, and it was I kind of, at first I wasn't that so much into electronic music. I was more into kind of as a young teenager, more into kind of rock and even folk and stuff, but not so much the electronic stuff. And then when I started to get into that, I remember I went to see The Orb, and it was just one whole set of continuous music. And, you had bits and vibes that were similar, bits from songs, samples coming in, but it was not just, that's when I started to change, and I started to get bored of going to see bands where they'll play the songs exactly how they sound on the album, and you're just that's kind of boring because there's nothing sort of unique about that. It's when you go to one of these gigs, The Orb was one of the first ones that comes to mind. But even if I think of it, kind of bands I've seen, I don't know how you are with your drone metal, but that band Sun, I went to see them, and that was one of the most incredible gigs I've ever been to in my life. That totally changed my perception of what a gig can be. So I think it's better a lot of the time when you have stuff I like continuous music in gigs personally, but I like how if I go to see someone now, most of the time, it kind of depends who it is, right? But most of the time you want to, well, for me personally, I want to see something. I don't want to hear stuff how it sounds on the album. I want to hear something completely different. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think playing song, bands that are really tight and they have have great songs, I'll just leave the gigs like that to them. They can take care of that. And, for me, I'm gonna do something. I don't know. I just see it as more of a performance and less of a demonstration of the record, Yeah. So I try to do something different, and, there's nothing at stake really for my performances. I used to go see a lot of bands in LA when, like, at this venue called The Smell. When I first moved there, that was like where No Age and Health would play a lot, that kind of noise rock scene. And so those guys would play all the time, and I just remember seeing Health play, and they would do the same exact set for, like, I would see them one year, and then I'd see them like a year later and throughout the year, and they would just do the exact same set, and I was just like, all right. And they would completely destroy that set, but, they're experts at it, but I just don't think that's necessary for me.
See, for me as well, I would get bored with that, because there was times that, like, I played in different bands over the years, and see, at times when you're, like, doing the same stuff over and over again, there's times when I'd be like, can we do maybe a jam or something? Can we cover something? Can we do something, like a bit different? Because, I mean, like you said, they're probably, like, you're very good at it if you're doing the same thing over and over again, obviously, because you're constantly practicing the same thing. But I like a gig to be a kind of unique experience, I like it to be something that you're not going to see every night, it's unique to this night and this place.
Well, I think for a lot of bands, really, really, like, hitting home with what you do and like nailing those songs, that's like consistency is how you reach more people. And, you're just like, a lot of bands have really succeeded by doing that. By really just, knocking that same thing out of the park every time, just like driving it home. But, it's just totally unnecessary for me when I don't have any sort of thesis or thing that I'm trying to accomplish with anything that I'm doing,
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, it's funny because, for example, I mentioned my dad earlier. Me and my dad, was it last year? I think it was. We went to see Bruce Springsteen in Glasgow, you know what I mean? And that was like, for what it was, for like, he turned up and it was the stadium and he's the boss, and like, it was actually very good and very entertaining. And he played for like 3.5 hours and there was no support act, which I thought was pretty cool, like, so I will do like stuff like that from time to time, go and see things like that. But those kind of things usually, it's different, but they're usually not my favorite shows. My favorite shows are usually the ones that are like, it's just the ones where you don't know what's going to kind of happen next.
Right.
And like, and it kind of like sucks you in, I'm sure you know yourself, you've been to those shows where like, you're like, when it's over, you're like, where did the time go? You know what I mean? It's just like, you were completely sucked into this thing with everyone else around you,
Yeah. Well, I'm sure seeing Bruce Springsteen was awesome. He is awesome.
It was fun.
Yeah, I like those surprising moments at a show for sure.
Yeah, totally, man. And like, we're starting to sort of come towards the end of the show now, but like, tell us what have you got planned? I mean, I noticed that there's a new Stephen Molyneux tape coming out from No Kings, is among other things, but tell us a bit about what's happening with you in the future.
Yeah, we did the Steve tape, and I think the label will continue as an occasional project whenever something comes along, and I'd like it to carry on as sort of this kind of ephemeral publishing operation. I'd like to do zines and maybe even make clothes or something like that. I just have too many interests, so I want to keep making stuff. But I don't have any music plans right now. I'm gonna try and start working on some more stuff. I did a couple recordings with groups of people that were like sort of frameworks for improvisation. Like I got this group of singers that I worked with last year, and we just kind of had some direction for them, and then we just recorded some stuff. So I want to do more stuff like that, these kind of improvised group works. I'm going to try and record some of that stuff, but that's about it.
No, yeah, that sounds pretty cool, actually. Definitely keep up with that stuff. No, Lee, this has been great talking to you. Really kind of interesting. It's been good to pick your brains a bit. Like I said, I've liked your music for a while and stuff, so it was nice to get to talk to you. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and giving us your time today.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Very nice to talk to you.
So my thanks again to Lee for coming on the show. I really enjoyed the conversation, a lot of interesting perspectives on things, and sometimes I like to get the old technical chat in there. We've been a bit more philosophical as of late. So that is your lot for this show. The website, BresnixCast.com, BresnixCast.com. Follow me on Twitter at Vladimir Bresnix. And to finish, let's obviously listen to some more Lee Noble. So from the Ashenden album again, this is one of my favourites. This is Sanyo Loop.
Ooh.